lot of folks don't know the early history of this area, Dan, before it became Sneezer and then Centerville and all those things. This road right out here that everybody comes in on and turns on to Zor Church Road is Georgia Highway 124 right now. But many years ago, that was known as the Rockbridge Trail. Now, when there's another trail just down across the Yellow River. That trail is the Hightower Trail. So this road originally was an Indian trail, the Rockbridge Trail. The reason they called it the Rockbridge is because Yellow River down there, just below here, where the Promised Land is and all of those other plantations and such that Centerville's kind of known for, that river is fordable there, and it was a rock bridge, thus the Rockbridge Trail. And it goes all the way up through into Lawrenceville and beyond, and intersects with the Peachtree Trail, or the Peachtree Trail, depends upon which historian you read, up beyond Lawrenceville up toward Duluth, up in that area near the Chattahoochee River. So this is an old trail. When the first white settlers, Caucasian Europeans, started to move into this area, they asked the Creek Indians that were here, who made this trail? Because it was a pretty well-worn road by that time. And they said, we don't know who made it. It was here when we got here. We think the ancient ones made it. So it's an old Indian trail. And the first settlement in this area was down along that river, the Yellow River, because you had to have water. There's a few branches in the area. No Business Creek, one that comes to mind, that's kind of famous for the rock houses and other things. But that river was important to the early development of what we call Centerville, Rockbridge District in this part of Gwinnett County. So as such, when people started to settle, they bought land or got land in the lotteries, the land lotteries, down along that river. One of those people being Thomas McGuire, who was the owner of the Promised Land plantation. He started with 50 acres, which became over 1,000 acres. Right across from him was another fellow by the name of Elijah Anderson. Elijah Anderson's place was known as Pleasant Valley, and Pleasant Valley was another large 1,000 acre or so plantation. And one of my direct ancestors, a fellow by the name of Richard Holt, he came down from Virginia in the late 1700s and settled in this part of the county, built a mill on Yellow River, down there about where the new bridge is, real close to where the old bridge used to be, down there where the new bridge is, and it was known as Holt's Mill. It was there long enough that it became known as Old Holt's Mill, and then when he decided to sell it and move into Stone Mountain and get more involved in mercantile business, which is what he was doing when he died in 1862, he sold that mill to Thomas McGuire. Thomas McGuire had a daughter. He had several daughters, good Catholic boy that he was, but he had a daughter, and her name was Anne. So that mill went from being called Holt's Mill or Old Holt's Mill to being called Anne's Mill. Well, as the village began to grow up around the mill, as they will do, because people come to the mill to mill things and other trades settle in there, that little village became known as Ann's Town. And as we do in the South, over time we make things different. And one of those things that we made different was Ann's Town became Annistown. So the road that we're all familiar with, you and I grew up with, is Annistown Road. Really should be Annstown Road. So in a nutshell, I guess that's a little bit of basic background history about this area that kind of sets the stage, I guess, for what Centerville is today. Of course, it was Sneezer. You know the story about Sneezer, guy hiding in a hollow tree down there, and he was sneezing and so on and so forth. There's another story that says it was also called Lick Skillet.
Which is about the same story.
Exactly. It's the same story with just a different, instead of a sneeze, it was he was being fed.
Could have been the same person.
Probably was. Mm-hmm. Probably was the same guy. We do know that during the Civil War, Thomas McGuire wrote, he kept a very detailed farm diary. And really a lot that we know about early life in this part of Georgia on a subsistence farm, which, you know, I think people have the wrong idea. Gwinnett County never was a place of big, gigantic plantations, big cotton plantations or big rice plantations or anything like that. What you think of when you think of Tara, if you will, and Gone with the Wind, most of the farms were subsistence farms. That means that they raised enough stuff to feed themselves. If they were to happen to own slaves, they fed their slaves, and they might have sold some things in the community. If they did raise cotton, it was 2 or 3 bales a year that they carried down to Lithonia and put on the train to either go to Atlanta or Augusta for sale.
But Thomas McGuire probably had one of the larger plantations in this area.
He did. Thomas McGuire, it was a little over 1,000 acres when he stopped acquiring land. What happened was when the rumors of war began to stir in this area, a lot of people were nervous about that. So they started to sell off property. And Thomas McGuire was more than happy to buy their property. So that's how he acquired a lot of land. Thomas McGuire also, like I said, he kept this farm journal that was extremely detailed. He kept every day, temperature, what he did that day, what they produced on the farm that day, if he was a shoemaker, a cobbler by trade, so if he made shoes for anybody in the household, slaves or whomever, he noted that. I made shoes for Sally and John and whomever. So, you know, it's very, very detailed. One of the interesting things about that is that a good friend of the McGuire family later on in the early 20th century were the Marshes or Mitchells from Atlanta. A young lady by the name of Margaret Mitchell spent quite a bit of time down here on what we call the Promised Land Plantation, which is what Thomas McGuire called his farm. And it is believed that she patterned Mr. O'Hara in Gone with the Wind. In fact, you can read, I've been to the Atlanta History Center and actually put on the white gloves and read the original stuff and some of the other documentation down there. And there's a lot of folks who believe that Thomas McGuire is really Mr. O'Hara and that Tara was really the Promised Land. And a lot of the stories in that book are very, very similar to things that we know by historical fact that happened in the McGuire life.
And another house that is across the river, matter of fact, it too is still standing, and I think this is the Elisha Anderson house,
home, which is called Pleasant Valley.
Which is a brother-in-law, I believe, to McGuire, is that right?
Well, Thomas McGuire married Elijah Anderson's daughter, first time, Elizabeth.
She died.
She died. Here's how she died. This is interesting because you don't think about these kind of things in the world we live in today. She was getting on a horse, and a blanket pin, a horse pin, stuck her in the leg, and she got infected and died from that. They already had several children, so Thomas decided, and think about this too, travel is not like it is today. Rockbridge District, Centerville, was pretty much contained. It was right here.
Yeah.
So if you dated somebody, it was probably somebody you went to church with or somebody that was your cousin's sister-in-law or something. Well, Thomas made a real short work of this. He decided that he would just marry one of Elijah Anderson's other daughters, and that was his second wife. And that's who you see pictures of. If you see pictures of Thomas McGuire, you'll see him and his second wife.
And it's also thought that as McGuire's house could have been what Margaret Mitchell patterned Tara from, that the Anderson house could be what she patterned 12 Oaks.
Yes, the Ashley house.
Yes.
Yep.
What was Elisha Anderson's?
David was his son that inherited.
Okay, but in that, what's that house known for? I mean, isn't it like the Elisha Mitchell Anderson house or something like that?
I've always heard it called the Anderson home or the Pleasant Valley. It's what it was known as.
So it's a good possibility that Margaret Mitchell did come out here.
Oh, it's a fact. She did spend summers out here because this was sure enough country back then in the 20s, 30s.
And of course, Margaret Mitchell is also connected with Social Circle because I think part of I believe it's maybe the Marsh family, was the one who owned or built the Blue Willow out there, which is so very famous.
Yeah, the big where the big restaurant is.
And then also over in the city of Between, which is between Loganville and Monroe, the house there that's currently for sale, big 2-story house, beautiful house, that was part of the Marsh family.
Yeah.
Interesting story about Margaret Mitchell. Her first husband, of course, was Mitchell, and his best man was Marsh. I think Mitchell may have had a little substance problem or something.
He was fond of the bottle. He liked to tip the drink.
So anyway, that marriage came to an end. So then later, I'm not sure how much later, but Margaret Mitchell married her husband's best man, Marsh. Matter of fact, as you well know, she is buried in the Marsh plot out at Oakland Cemetery.
Right.
I've been there on several occasions.
Yep.
But some good history right there.
Yeah.
But that was one of the larger plantations, especially in this part of Gwinnett County.
Yeah. Probably one of the larger ones in the county, I would think at the time.
And another good-sized plantation owner was Charles Green Livesey, I believe was his name. Green, I think he went by Green Livesey.
And one of his sons was Mink.
Well, I think it was Green Livesey who, in biblical terms, begot Charles Livesey.
Gotcha.
Who begot Mink Livesey. I think that Mink Livesey was a grandson of Charles of Green Livesey.
Gotcha.
An interesting story with Green, and I've talked to Thomas Livesey about this, and he certainly backs it up, and I've talked to other folks too. But Mr. Livesey, Green Livesey, actually had two families.
Yeah. Thomas has told me that too.
He had a white family,
right,
and a family of color.
Yes, you're
and
exactly
of course,
right.
they even today they have reunions. I mean,
right.
it's a very close knit family.
Yep.
So there's not a racial problem there.
No, and it's interesting if you talk to Thomas about how they began, and Thomas is a historian and a genealogist extraordinaire. He is such an asset to the African American community in this county. When Mr. Tom is gone, I really don't know what folks are going to do, because he has such a wealth of knowledge. And his office, his conference room, is about as big as the room we're sitting in now. And I don't know if you've ever been there, but it is piled full of genealogy charts and photographs. And so he's quite the guy.
He's truly an asset, and he's 87 years old.
Yes, sir.
So maybe
Still driving.
Good. Maybe he's good for another 20 years or 30.
I hope so.
I do too. But yeah, over the years, Centerville certainly has changed. You and I, we've seen a lot of change.
Sure.
In Centerville area, we've collected, through the library system, and people, reconnecting back with Centerville, a lot of material in the last few months about Centerville, which kind of helped to rekindle a lot of thoughts, a lot of thinking. But you remember, you and I, we attended Centerville Elementary School.
Yes.
Not the Centerville Elementary School that's located
right
where it is today.
Right.
But the one that we attended was the one down where Hope and Life Fellowship Church is today.
Exactly.
And my wife and I, we were sharing this earlier. Back, it seemed like something you'd want to also reference the fact you attended school with Abraham Lincoln or something, But, in this schoolhouse, we had, the first grade was in one class, one room by itself.
Near the lunchroom.
Near the lunchroom, that's correct. And the second and third grade was in a classroom to itself. And the teacher had to share these classes, so they sort of had to divide the time. The fourth and fifth grade were together, sixth and seventh grade were together, and then when you got up to the eighth grade, you were all by yourself. You're big time.
Yep, fixing to go back to square one when you went to high school.
And then from there, of course, South Gwinnett High School had been built by the time you and I were coming along.
Right.
So we would leave Centerville and go to the ninth grade up at Snellville at South Gwinnett High School. I was in the 10th graduating class at South Gwinnett. Now you go back many years before that, My mother graduated Centerville Junior High. Now, at that time, it went to the 9th grade.
Mm-hmm.
When my mother graduated Centerville Junior High, she went to the 10th grade. I mean, that was the last class at Centerville Junior High School. In order to go to the 11th grade, and this was 1933, and there wasn't a 12th grade.
Yep.
You had to go to Snellville.
Right.
Some of her classmates, I know there was 3 ladies, one of which was Jewel Campbell, another one was a couple of the Mason daughters. What they did, now here again, this is just 5 miles up the road in Snellville, but they roomed with Mr. and Mrs. E.R. Snell so as they could attend the 11th grade
Right.
in Snellville.
I'll tell you, just to piggyback off of that, just not to interrupt you, but to interrupt you.
Go right ahead.
Thank you.
Floor is yours.
My dad, just, you know, he went through the 8th grade
Right.
here. Now, this is in the 40s.
Okay.
So your mom was a little bit before him. He went through the 8th grade here when it was time to go to the 9th grade, and they still didn't go to 12, but the 9th, 10th, and 11th grade was in Snellville. So what they had to do, and you remember where Blossom Hill used to be, where the Kroger is now.
Oh, yes, I do.
So Dad and them, with the Centerville bus, would pick them up in the morning and take them to Blossom Hill. And they'd get off the bus, and then a little bit later, the Snellville bus would come down, pick them up, and take them to high school, the 9th grade, 10th grade, 11th grade. Then in the afternoon, the Snellville bus would bring them back to Blossom Hill, and then they would be distributed back to their domicile by the Centerville bus. So, you know, a lot of changes. And I asked Dad, I said, well, what kind of bus was that? He said, I don't know. It was probably a Ford. Yeah, this is post-World War II. So,
And you've got to remember, too, all these roads were dirt back then.
Absolutely.
So these buses, they were beating and banging and plowing through mud and all this kind of stuff.
Right.
Because in the 40s, Highway 124 had not even been paved. It was paved in 1951.
Yeah. Well, I feel like we're telling old school tales now, but.
I feel like Abraham Lincoln should be sitting here with us, you know?
Yes, have a seat, Mr. Lincoln. We'll get to you in a moment. When I was in high school, the road now where our new park is, Yellow River Park, that road was a little bit of a pig trail dirt road.
That's right.
Just wide enough for a school bus. And if they met somebody had to give. The school bus either had to back up or the person had to back up. And it was rough as a cob. And of course, you know, now all that's paved and there are horse trails all through in there. But that was when I was in high school, in the 9th grade. So that's not been but years ago.
And, you know, I can remember, Floyd Johnson drove that route on the bus.
He was my bus driver.
And out of Centerville, there was 2 bus routes, and Highway 124 was sort of the dividing point. Floyd's route was on this side, which would be the west side of 124, and it went, I don't know how, went as far.
Definitely went across the bridge.
Far east, but yeah, and sometimes went over as far as Highway 78.
Yep.
And then came back up and then back down Bethany Church Road.
Mm-hmm. And a lot of that was driven by where people lived. I mean, if people moved in that happened to live over
You had to change.
Then you had to change the route.
And see, that road you're speaking of, what was that, Juhan Road?
Juhan Road, yeah.
Juhan Road. You know, pretty much all the traffic flowed like from Stone Mountain. You come out Annistown Road, you go down the hill, and before you got to the bridge, the road just bore off just a little bit to the right.
Mm-hmm.
So it was easy to make a right-hand turn, but especially for a bus, it was next to impossible to make a left-hand turn because the road went this way, not this way.
Right.
And I remember Floyd Johnson took his tractor and Harrah's over there, and he actually graded with his Harrah's a wing on that road so the bus could go in
Make
there.
that turn.
You know, I mean, you couldn't do that today.
No, well, you could, but you'd be locked up.
You'd be locked up for it. But, you know, people had to use common sense.
And ingenuity.
And ingenuity.
And initiative.
And initiative. But he did that. I recall he actually kind of took those Harrows and that tractor and graded that so the bus could easily make that turn. But yeah, we've lived through some interesting times.
Talking about the old school, you remember the gymnasium down there?
How well do I? Yes.
Yeah, that gymnasium was built by local people. My grandfather, my daddy's daddy, remembers cutting the beams that were underneath that building, and they were oak and, gosh, I don't know, 30, 40, 50 feet long, huge beams underneath that building. But that was a matter of pride. But I can remember, and I know you remember this, that when it was heated by 2 potbelly stoves,
Right.
one at each corner of the building. So you tried to stay on the end where the goal was, because in the center court it was cold.
Mid court was bad.
It was cold out there.
Mid court was bad.
Yeah, it was not fun, and you had to be real careful. If the ball got over there and got wedged up under that stove, if you had a good hot fire going, then you might be replacing the ball.
That's true.
And there's nothing smells worse than a leather basketball on fire.
That's right. But you're right. Back then when that gymnasium was built, it was built by the community. But then probably there might have been some timber came off of your grandfather's farm. I know my uncle, my uncle Doc Mitchell. I know he gave timber, for the building, and but it was a community effort.
Sure.
And Centerville back in the day. And I preach this a lot now with our Centerville Business Association, is the fact that we have to continually work to keep community.
Sure.
But back in the day when you and I were born, we just sort of were born into a community, a community that pretty much everybody knew one another, a community that everybody, a lot of folks were related to one another. And if you walk into the store, if you're not related to that individual, you are related to someone who is related to that individual. So it was a community. And, if there was a death in the community, especially up at Colbert Brannan's store, they'd put out a cigar box with a little pad out there, and you might donate or contribute 50 cents, drop the 50 cents or $1, whatever.
Yes.
But at the end of the day, when you went to the funeral home to view that corpse, there would be a nice thing of wreath of flowers there from a banner across it saying the Centerville community.
Yep.
But in every instance, you see community here.
Well, another example of that, you remember the year Mr. Arthur Darby's, he raised cotton, and he was sick, wasn't able to get out to the field. So we all gathered together. You were there. I was just a little shaver, but I do remember being there. I can close my eyes now, and in my mind I can see that cotton field and all of those people in there picking cotton to help him get his crop in.
That's right.
And that was just the way people did things.
I think I was something like 4, maybe 5 years old, and I don't really know how much cotton I picked, but I guess I picked enough to have bragging rights, and I can truthfully say I picked cotton, So
I can't say that I was there. All I can say is I was there when you picked cotton.
That's right. But I think my mother even, the pick sack. I mean, that's a term you don't see or hear that much anymore. But there is a special bag that kind of drags the ground, and you pack. My mother had actually created a pick sack for me to go out there. Yeah. But a lot of things. I mean, we have got pictures of ladies' sewing groups where they come together and create a quilt, and then they would raffle that quilt off. Back in the mid-40s, there was a building built called the Teacherage. It was right next door to the Baptist church.
Remember it well.
And because when teachers would come into the community to teach, they'd have to board with someone. Sure. I know right across the street from us, we had a lady we knew her as Aunt Seeley Johnson. Great lady, kind of like a grandmother to me. But I know Miss Thelma Lightermilk. I think she taught one of the grades. I'm not sure what, but she boarded with Aunt Seeley. My great uncle Doc Mitchell, my mother's uncle, there was a lady who boarded with he and his family over there.
And it speaks to how rural this place was.
Yeah.
You were 35 miles from Atlanta, which you might as well have been 100 miles or 1,000 miles from Atlanta, because it just, like you said earlier, the roads were not such as you could if you had a car, you sure probably wouldn't make it that far.
Not on a consistent basis.
No, well, my great-grandfather, A.D. Freeman, when he died, he died without a will. So they all went down, my grandpa, his brother, and A.D.'s wife at the time, went down to E.F. Freeman's store, who was a great uncle of mine, and appointed Mr. Moore, F.M. Moore, to be the executor or the administrator of the estate. And they liquidated all of his property. Now, this was in 1930 when this happened. And just to give you an example of how rural this was, Mr. Babe McCullers, who's kin to our friend Christy, Mr. Babe McCullers bought Papa A.D.'s mule for $75, which was a handy sum. He also had a Model A Ford that Mr. Babe McCullers bought for $25.
So the mule
Brought $50
three
more.
times the price of a Ford.
Exactly. So it lets you know. I mean, in farm implements, 25 cents, 50 cents. My grandpa had happened to have borrowed a hoe from A.D. Grandpa A.D., my grandpa, Daddy C. Freeman, my daddy's daddy, had happened to have borrowed a hoe from A.D. to hoe some corn or something. And he had that hoe when A.D. died. That's the only thing he got out of the estate, because he didn't turn it back into Mr. Moore to be sold. So he got his daddy's hoe out of the whole deal.
So I guess if anyone hears of this, the statute of limitations is gone.
It's well gone, and I don't know if the hoe exists anymore.
It's probably worn out.
Probably, if it does, it's about that thick when it should be about like this.
It's true, right?
Yep.
But times have changed. I was born in 49. You were born in what, 53?
52.
52. And by then Centerville had become, or at least pretty much had become, a bedroom community.
Sure.
If you back the calendar up another 10 years or so prior to our arrival here in Centerville, it was transitioning, but it was still a pretty
farming community. It was a farming community.
If you go back 20 years, it was definitely a farm community.
Oh, no doubt. Can I tell you a story about A.D. since you brought up farming?
Sure.
Most people would be embarrassed about this, but I'm not at all. My great-grandfather, A.D. Freeman, was a bootlegger. And that's okay. I mean, there were crops that were raised out of the ground, and if you had extra corn that you couldn't feed the animals, you might make you a little white liquor out of that. If you had extra apples left over, or pears, or cherries, or something out of the garden, or out of off the farm, you might make brandy with that or whatever. And that's A.D. kind of did that. So he lived down there where the Puckett, it's known as the Puckett home place now, but it was A.D. Freeman's place. And Puckett's bought it when he died. They acquired that property because it was sold off. But anyway, A.D. had a groundhog still, which meant that the still was in the ground. Now he would make my grandpa tote sugar and other necessities for the manufacture of said substance down to the still. Well, Papa was getting married. This was around 1910. He was getting married to my grandmother. Well, he had worked out in the field all day and come in to wash up because he was getting married that afternoon. And A.D. told him, said, "Where do you think you're going?" He said, "You got to help me tote sugar to the still tonight." And Papa says, "I'm getting married." He said, "Not until you tote that sugar to the mill." And if you remember my grandpa, you know kind of what he probably told him. We can't say in the company that we're in today, even though it's just you and I. Somebody else might see this at some point. But anyway, it was explained to him in certain terms that by cracky he would be going to get married, and he did. So I got a bootlegger in my past.
Well, Terry, I certainly have enjoyed our time together, and the way we are, we could go on for another couple of hours.
At
I'm
least.
sure. I mean, there's that much material out there.
At least, and stories to be told, and
and we're very proud of Centerville.
oh, sure, absolutely.
We're very proud of Centerville, and we always will be proud of Centerville.
Sure. It's home.
It's home.
That's
it's
right.
home.
And I don't care what Thomas Wolfe says, you can go home again.
That's it. When I know recently we've had this reunion where we brought a lot of people back in, and a lot of people moved. We had people come in from, I don't know, 75, 100 miles away.
Yep.
For this occasion today, and it's good to see those smiling faces out
Oh,
there.
yeah, sure it is.
It's good to eat that potato salad and eat that fried chicken.
Oh,
yeah.
don't forget that coconut cream pie.
Oh, yeah. Wasn't that good?
Oh.
Well, I
Can
guess
can I tell a funny story?
better be quick.
I can be quick. It's my Aunt Lucy. You know, remember my Aunt Lucy?
I do remember your Aunt Lucy.
Aunt Lucy was weak-hearted, and back in the day, they would put weak-hearted people in the bed for a while until they got to feeling better. Well, my Aunt Lucy was going through one of her weak-hearted spells, and she was in the bed, so I went down to see her. Little barefoot, snotty-nosed young, and I go in there, and I said, "How you doing, Aunt Lucy?" She says, "I'm doing good. Just thinking about my favorite song." I said, "Really, what's that?" She said, "At the cross." I said, "Honey, I'm a Methodist. That just makes the cockles of my heart get warm when you say that." She said, "Could I sing it for you?" I said, "Sure, why don't you?" She said, at the cross, where the train scared my hoss, and the wheels of my wagon rolled away, rolled away. It was there by chance that I tore my Sunday pants, and now I have to wear them every day." But she wasn't finished. Every day, and she went on every day. So that's the kind of things. That's how we entertained ourselves when we were kids.
That's it. Good, clean fun.
There you go.
All right, bro.
It's always a pleasure, man.
Yeah, man. Thank you much. God bless you.
You too.